In some exciting news, I got to cover this year's Fantasia International Film Festival. Obviously, with everything going on right now, I wasn't able to attend in person. That would have been awesome, hopefully next year. But I was still able to check out a bunch of movies, and they made it all super easy, and they were really nice. So I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to everyone at Fantasia for letting me be part of it. One of the films I got to check out is the new documentary Feels Good Man. This is a film that chronicles the Pepe the Frog meme, which I realize might sound pretty dumb to a lot of people, or it sounds like the plot or the idea would be really thin, but it was actually one of the most fascinating and strange journeys I've had with a documentary in recent years. It showcases the small beginnings of its invention by creator Matt Fury, who made it as a sort of webcomic in the MySpace era, to where it is today, a symbol of white nationalism and ignorance, registered as an official hate symbol. This is a film that carefully tracks significant moments of the internet that aren't really talked about in mainstream media, stringing together a timeline that tracks the rise of internet trolls, the era of internet ironicism and desensitivity, and the concerning nature of its far reach. The movie has a lot of layers to appreciate. I think a lesser film would have leaned into just Matt Fury and his struggle to reclaim his art. He's an interesting guy, he's got this weird energy to him, kind of like a sensitivity and lack of awareness, and it could have made for a compelling story, but there's so much more going on. It goes deeper, interviewing professionals in behavior and psychology who specialize in the new age of internet communication. The result is several illuminating interviews and anecdotes and observations that begin to give you an idea of how this movement became a thing. I also really appreciated that they had interviews with just regular people, bloggers, 4chaners that were around in that era, some of which fall on opposite sides of this whole thing. There was this part where they're interviewing this guy that's in support of all this terrible shit, and his room, they show his room, and there's footage of their house. That is the scariest shit I've seen all year. This film also could have relied on the fascinating and disturbing underpinnings of the story alone. Oftentimes there's a documentary that has a great subject or tells a great story, but lacks in its filmmaking or in its presentation, and I was really excited that that wasn't the case here. There's a bunch of drawings and animations made specifically for the film, and there's also really great visual representations of what they're talking about. The editing is also excellent and does a lot to add to the personality and the humor as well. Overall, this is a super well-made documentary. It's funny and endearing and upsetting, and it's one of the best films of the year, so I would definitely recommend you check this out when you get the chance. And I'm gonna give Feels Good Man an 8 out of 10. Another film I saw is the latest from Japanese director Shinichiro Ueda, called Special Actors. I think a lot of people would know his previous film One Cut of the Dead, which was great and made it onto my best of 2019 list. And in similar fashion to that film, in a lot of regards actually, I can't talk too much about the specifics because it's so tied to the plot that it's very spoilery if I talk too much about it, but it's essentially about this one kid, and he has a dream of being an actor, but he suffers from this medical condition where if he gets too nervous, he collapses and faints. But he's soon introduced to a strange new acting group. Instead of acting in films, they act to help out people. I don't want to really explain much more than that. This is another film that has a real energy and personality to it. It's fun and light, but not devoid of any other deeper meanings. It gives the actors a lot of opportunity to try things out and be more physical with their performances. But the plot does start to wear a little thin about halfway through. It starts to really lose its momentum. And I didn't love all the actors, unfortunately. Really, the whole experience felt like a bit of a mixed bag. Not all the comedy really worked. There was some fun swing jazz in the soundtrack that I enjoyed, but then other times the music choices felt distracting or like they didn't fit. Kind of minor, but I also noticed some issues with blocking. I felt like actors weren't quite hitting their marks, so there were some issues with focus and focus pulls, which most of that is pretty forgivable. It's still mostly funny and enjoyable, and I like where the story goes, even if it does wear a little thin. But the main things that I found bugging me were, well, for one, how familiar it is. But not only that, I felt like some of the execution of certain parts, the intention was unclear. I felt like I read through it, and so I couldn't tell if the movie thought it was clever or if I was supposed to have done that. I don't know. And there was this aspect I wish was explored more, where I felt like they were being put in this tough moral position, but there's really only one scene that highlights it, and I wish they did more with that. There were also some little plot conveniences that did bug me, but overall this is still a funny movie. It's got a real energy to it. I did really enjoy some of the performances. The movie really shines in the scenes shared with the entire group and their camaraderie and them coming up with plans together, which is luckily a sizable portion of the film. A lot of the comedy does work. Maybe it runs a little thin, but it's probably still worth your time if you liked his previous film. Not as good, still enjoyable, and I'm gonna give Special Actors a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was Labyrinth of Cinema, the last film from acclaimed director Nobuhiko Obayashi, who is most well known for his 1977 film Hausu. His last work is a sort of surreal war drama epic, and honestly, even trying to synopsize or categorize the film would rob it of some of its identity. But if you were trying to be concise, you could say it's a film that tracks the history of Japan through its wars through film. If that makes sense. Obayashi has always been drawn to depicting stories revolving around the effects caused by, or responses to, the horrors of war and its destruction of youth. This film shares that lifeblood with many of his other works. The setup centers around 3 boys and a local girl and the town's only cinema that's closing down for good. But on its last night, they decide to hold a marathon of war movies as a sort of last hurrah. And just so happens that on this last night, it's pouring rain, which means all the other businesses are closed, which leads to a packed house for the theater's final night. Soon after being seated, the 3 boys and the local girl realize that they're being transported into the films themselves. As you would expect with this director, the film has an incredibly unique personality and tone that only he would have brought to it, with its meta qualities and unique scene transitions, purposefully bad effects, unnatural lighting choices, unconventional framing and camera work, and so on. And frankly, there's very few directors with the guts to give their film this kind of look. I think it's very likely that a lot of people are going to watch this film and realize that the effects are bad or whatever and kind of laugh it off the screen and think that it's either like a bad movie on purpose or it's just a cheaply made film and not really understand what's happening. See, this felt like Obayashi's magnum opus, and looking at it through that lens, I began to wonder why he made this film and why he made it the way he did. I think the title reveals a lot, actually. For one, it refers to the labyrinthian nature of the densely packed plotting of the film and its many layered historical references. But it also refers to the many tools used throughout the history of film. And since it's trying to depict those various eras in both film and in the country, it would make perfect sense to use the now dated effects and visuals of their respective time periods. Which is why you'll see bad compositing and rear screen projection. There's scenes tinted blue to emulate when they used to dye the film negative. There's even like purposely bad ADR, just a bunch of stuff. It's pretty awesome. The unflinching commitment to this idea really made for a unique experience. But even with its strange choices, Obayashi has always really had a strength to his composition. He's able to make these visually striking and lurid feeling images that evoke something beautiful but bizarre. You might have noticed in this trailer footage even, a lot of these shots are really striking. The film does run almost 3 hours long, and I will say, for how unconventional it is, it can get a little visually tired, and when you pair that with how dense the plotting of the film is, it can get a bit overwhelming. Throughout my viewing, I found myself actively trying to decode many of the different choices made, and I know for a fact I did not get everything that this film has to offer, which I guess could be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it. As someone who prides himself in embracing challenging films, this was one of the most challenging in recent memory. It will require a certain level of command over your attention. But what you'll find is this beautiful, chaotic, arresting film drenched in hyperbole about the power of cinema, its influence over people, and the hope that it can still change perspectives. And for now, I'm going to give Labyrinth of Cinema a 7 out of 10. I should also mention other Fantasia reviews will continue to come out. I'm also going to be covering some films at the New York Film Festival, like the new Steve McQueen film, Mangrove, Nomadland from Chloe Zhao, On the Rocks, the new Sofia Coppola film, and a few others. So if that sounds like your jam, definitely subscribe, that would be great, or don't, and I'll just sit here and suffer. Anyway, that's it for now, bye.